All right, coming right back in for episode 2. Uh, Stand by for the shingles, the doors, bricks, all that kind of stuff. This is going to be a long one, so I'm not going to waste your time. Let's get to it. Oh, yeah, and plaster. We're going to be using my favorite thing, tile grout. I love tile grout, and so will you. Okay, so I'm going to try to make this hip and engaging with some mystical trap beats. Please let me know in the comments if it works. Please let me know if it doesn't. I'm here to work for you guys. Alright, so we're going to start with some bricks. So I'm going to take a square of the foam board and just roll some, aluminum foil along it to kind of give it a craggy brick texture and to thin it out a bit. And then I'm going to take an X-Acto knife, and I think the dimensions I'm using for these bricks are 1/4 inch by a 1/2 inch, or slightly under a 1/2 inch. So I'm just coming in, cutting out the strips. Sometimes it takes 2 passes with the hobby knife, trying not to damage this cheap foam really quickly. And a note, I would use a fresh blade for this. And keep in mind that, foam, for some reason, eats blades. I hate it. I know, it's annoying. But, yeah, I'm just coming up with a system to cut them as quickly as possible, eyeballing it. This is not super precise. It doesn't need to be. So I try to cut multiple strips at the same time. Then I use the old school texturing technique of throwing them inside a tin of rocks or a plastic container of rocks, shaking it up, and this will round out all the sharp angular corners and make it look more eroded and weathered. And I need to get better rocks. Okay, and those are the bricks done. So let's make some wooden beams to add as trim to the house. So same technique without the texturing, and I'm just cutting out similar sized strips. So these are probably a little over 1/4 inch in width, and they're as long as you want them to be. So these are going to be a little shorter, but I'm eventually going to have to cut longer ones to go along the roof and whatever. So I cut them out, and then to texture them, I first start by taking the back end of the X-Acto blade and kind of pressing it into the foam to create a slight bevel where it looks like the wood has been hewn and also eroded. And then for, more of a hewn look, as I was saying, I intermittently take the blade of the hobby knife and make some cuts in the corners to kind of bevel or chamfer or whatever the carpentry word is. Okay, then to get the wood grain, I'm going to use a wire brush, and you don't need to apply any pressure to this, just the weight of the brush itself will be enough to assert the wood grain texture in, running it along one direction of the plank. And once that is in there, I'm going to take some sort of like rolling pin type thing and flatten it out so it doesn't stand super proud of the house. And that's what you'll get eventually. So that's the wood and the bricks. Let's start putting them on, huh? Okay, so I get my bricks, get some hot glue, just start putting them on there. I do 3 rows of bricks on each side. I stack them up 3 bricks deep. So I make sure they're staggered so the bricks don't really overlap, and it gives a more realistic look. Yeah, and just keep working that around. You don't need a lot of hot glue for this, and you don't even need to use hot glue. I just use it for speed, but I'd recommend, if you don't have hot glue or don't want to use hot glue, just to use some sort of tacky PVA glue. And then I reassert some of the texture with a aluminum foil ball. And yeah, that's basically how you apply the bricks, and you can put them however you want. Okay, so the chimneys are probably the most fiddly part of this whole process. It's kind of hard to stack bricks like this in the building. So I just kind of improvise how I lay the bricks, trying to lay them as fast as possible. So I do a whole row along the outside of the chimney and just cut them to size, cutting off the excess over the lip of the chimney and just placing bricks in there as best I can. I'm totally okay if this is rickety. The story behind it is rickety. It's just a rickety story, so I'm not too concerned about that. And any mistakes you can make or that are made can be fixed in the paint job by adding pigments. There's a lot of ways to disguise it, so I'm just not too concerned. Okay, so for the wooden beams, I use a reference photo of old Tudor houses, which were popular in England in the high Middle Ages, Renaissance, whatever. And I just use hot glue to put those things in there as well. So you don't need hot glue for this. Tacky glue works as well. But straight PVA glue, like Elmer's, the watered down stuff, is really going to take a long time. So to fit these in properly, they're going to need to be angled when they intersect with other beams. So generally they're going to need to be at a 45-degree angle. I just put them on my cutting mat and eyeball a 45-degree angle cut. And for the second cut, I eyeball that as well and hope it all fits in properly, which it seems to on this one, but we got a blooper coming up. Okay, there we go. And you can make these designs as complicated as you want. It just takes varying degrees of time. So for the windows, I take a hobby knife and I cut in some faux bricks. So it looks like if you're looking into it, there's a second layer of bricks, but behind the bricks that surround the outside of the window. And this is just a small detail. You don't need to do it. And on the finished product, I don't really notice it that much, so you can totally skip the carving bricks around the window if you want to. And then I put a support beam across the top. I didn't make enough, so I'm having to build wood beam by wood beam as I go along. So make a big batch of all this stuff. It'll save you a lot of time when you actually start to put in the trim. What else can I talk about while we watch this ensorceling process? Well, let's see. Each story I do, so this is a 2-story building, is generally 2.5 to 3 inches. That's a fun tip. Okay, here comes the blooper. Don't do this. Or try not to do this. Just watch. Nope. That is too short. Okay. Part 2. Now that you got all your detailing work on the walls, let's do the final step, which is plaster. So I'm taking some unsanded tile grout. It really doesn't matter which color because it's going to get painted over. And I'm just taking a sculpting tool and scooping it on top of all the bricks first. And then I take a makeup brush and I brush out the excess, and the unsanded tile grout will actually sink in between all the bricks and make it look like mortar. This detail barely shows up and is not recognizable at a playing distance, so you can skip it if you want. Then I take some tile grout, and I just shovel it onto the walls, onto the chimney, because, I don't know, it's my favorite plaster effect. And then I brush it off before I start spraying it down with a makeup brush, getting it off the wood beams, off the bricks. And when that's done, I'm going to take a bottle of scenic glue, which is 1 part Mod Podge, 4 parts water, and some isopropyl alcohol, and spray that on the tile grout. Now, I'm using 2 spray bottles. The first spray bottle I made the pass with was just isopropyl alcohol, which is rubbing alcohol in water at a 1-to-1 ratio. And this acts as a flow aid, so that when I take my scenic glue bottle, the glue will be flow aided all up in between the grains of tile grout and to the foam board wall behind them, and it will stick very soundly. And once the scenic glue is sprayed on there and everything has a good coat, I'm taking a sculpting tool and just scooping on more tile grout to make sure the coverage is even, and I do some texturing with it as well. So there's the isopropyl alcohol to act as a flow aid, and there's the sculpting tool coming in to give it a better plaster-like finish. And to be perfectly honest, you can skip the whole scenic glue step, because tile grout's a natural adhesive as it is, and this is going to get a coat of Mod Podge, but I just like extra stability, so I definitely add the scenic spray glue to it as well. And then finally I take a Q-tip and just remove any excess tile grout that's on the wood beams or the top of the bricks. And just let that dry. It can take a while to dry, and I just do that one side at a time. But after the tile grout's been drying for about 30 minutes, you're pretty much good to go, and you can start working on another side. And here I'm just doing the chimney. Don't forget the chimney. Okay, we're done with that. Part 3, pine bark shingles. So pine bark can be found in the mulch section of your local hardware store. You get a huge bag of it for about $3 in my experience. And yeah, there's no particular brand you need to go. It's just pine bark. When you see it, you'll know what it is. And the shingles take a bit of work, but they have a really nice, fantastical Hansel und Gretel effect that I really like, especially for an inn run by night hags. Oh crap. So I just take the X-Acto knife and start cutting it down. I separate the little, it's like pine bark has almost strata lines that you can cut in between and separate it out. And when I get the pine bark thinned down, I just start cutting square shingles out of it. So I'm going to be honest, this is time intensive, and I wouldn't do it on every building, because this little batch took me 15 minutes. And you're going to need so many of these if you do a large building. So, yeah. Then the process is just, I'm using tacky glue on this side. I used hot glue on the other sides, but I find it's easier and faster to work with tacky glue. So I just use Alina's, lay out a bead across the roof, and just start putting them in place. So there might be some gaps in between them and some irregularities, but that's what you get with pine bark. And there are ways to fill them up with smaller pieces or with some moss, pigmentation, or whatever. So I just let that dry, and then I come in and start cleaning up any jutting, irregular areas with a hobby knife, making sure everything's a little more cleaned up. Then I notice a big gap in between the building and the roof shingles, so I have to put an extra layer in between the shingles, in between the layer of shingles and the wooden timber beams on the plaster walls. And I had to do it on that wall too, because there was too large of a gap, and I could see the cereal box material in between. And then I come back in later with a hobby knife and just cut out the majority of those shingles. Then I make sure the top is a smooth surface, and I was thinking about doing a foam wooden beam, but I don't know. I have a ton of balsa wood, and it was quicker, so I'm just using a small rod of balsa wood that's rectangular in nature, and I just do the same texturing technique that I use with the foam. I just hit it with a wire brush, I actually take a pen and just draw in some more exaggerated wood grains and knots in the wood, and just tacky glue that sucker on there. Taking a Q-tip to clean out any of the excess tacky glue, because tacky glue generally is pretty thick PVA glue, and it doesn't dry completely clear. And then I just add the third beam, and we're good to go on the roof. Okay, windows and fluff. Let's start with the windows before we discover what fluff means. So I'm going to use something called a plastic canvas. This is for the sewing world, and it basically looks like a grate. I think people call this granny grating. I'm not sure who those people are, but I've heard that word. And I totally forgot the dimensions and measurements for the upper windows, so I have to remeasure them. And what I do is I take this small square of plastic canvas. Usually they come in large sheets. And I just measure that out. So since the plastic canvas is a grid, you can actually kind of use that grid to inform your cuts. So it can be pretty easy to make a template and just cut along those grid lines. And it cuts very easily with a hobby knife. And there you go. Then I realized that I wanted these squares to be diagonal instead of just regular squares, because that looked too much like a prison, and I wanted this to have more of a medieval look. So I just took that template and tilted the granny grating or plastic canvas so that all the squares would be diagonal and be diamonds. And then I just trace that out and cut it. When you're doing your windows, when in doubt, take less off than you think you need, because you can always keep dry fitting the grating into the window and just removing material until it finally fits. This is sped up, but it doesn't really take that long. And there you go. Then I use that as a template for the other four. And I do add one piece of trim to this. I just take one of those almost toothpick-like wooden sticks and super glue it on, so there's kind of a beam of trim going down the vertical axis of the window. And then for the smaller windows, I'm not adding any trim. I'm just cutting out a smaller piece of the granny grating to serve as the smaller bottom windows. And there you go. You don't want it to fit too snugly. As long as it just fits and covers the window, that's good. We're going to be coming in with some Vallejo water texture and making them glass. And at this point, once all your windows are cut out, I just prime them black. Okay, that's the windows. We're going to come back to that in the next episode and how to finish them up. But you need to paint everything first. So for the fluff, I decided I wanted some lanterns around, just to add a little more zest. Nope, not zest, something else, some other word that I can't conjure right now. So I'm just taking an eye hook, which is a jewelry piece that is used for something, I don't know. And we're not to the eye hook yet. This is just a pin, and it has kind of a nail head on it. So I'm just putting this jewelry pin into the balsa wood. It just slides right in there because balsa wood is super light and not dense at all, and it's going to just serve as a big nail in the top roof beam. Okay, so for the lantern, we're finally getting to the eye hook part, and I just take a couple beads that I think look like lanterns, and we'll do a close-up in a minute of what they actually look like, but just go to Michael's, Hobby Lobby. Walmart has a jewelry section too, or whatever craft store, is available in your region, country, whatever. And I just super glue a couple beads together that I think look like lanterns. Yep, there we go. And that's pretty much it. We'll get to painting them in the next episode. Now, if you used hot glue on the shingles, you're going to have a bunch of stringy bits. Either take a lighter and burn them off, or a hairdryer works very well too for removing that. And to get this prep for painting, I'm just going to take some Mod Podge, credit going to Black Magic Craft for this tweak of an old practice. It used to just be PVA glue, which doesn't work as well as Mod Podge in terms of strengthening it. And adding black paint to it, adding a little bit of water so it's not completely gloopy, and just spreading that all over. Why do you add water? Well, I add water because Mod Podge has varnish in it and it's actually pretty thick, so it can obscure a lot of your detail if you put it on too thickly. So I don't really want to worry about that, so I just add water to it so it's just a bit thinner. Of course, it's not going to be as strong, but I don't know. This thing seemed really sturdy as it is, so yeah, I watered it down. And just spread that all over. You only need one coat of this. And if you want to work from a completely black base coat, and I'll talk about this next episode, you can just come in later with some watered down craft paint and apply layers of it until you get full opacity with the black. Another benefit of Mod Podge is that it dries faster than normal PVA glue, which is awesome, because who likes to wait? And there we go. All those steps will lead to a building that looks like this. Now, I hope this was helpful and gave you some ideas for your own builds. If it was, or you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. I answer everything, and I'd love to hear from you people. Thanks so much for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you want to. And stay tuned next video for the paint job. Thanks so much.